Alright, let's get one thing straight before we even start. 7 guys, 7 completely different universes of what love means to them. You think you know BTS? You've watched every interview, every V-Live, every Run BTS episode, and you've probably screenshotted that one Weverse answer where your bias said something about his ideal type, right? But here's the thing, what they casually mention in a fan meeting and what actually drives their hearts. Two very, very different stories. We're not talking about, oh, I like someone who smiles a lot. No, we're going way deeper than that. We're pulling from years of behind-the-scenes moments, lyric breakdowns, childhood stories, and the kind of psychological patterns that even they might not fully realize about themselves. So ask yourself this, which member once said his ideal girlfriend would need to accept that she'd always come second to his music? Which one literally described a date scenario so specific it sounded like he'd been rehearsing it in his head for years? And who, and this one's gonna shock you, once admitted that he's scared he might actually be too selfish to love someone properly? 7 members, 7 brutally honest confessions hidden in plain sight. From number 7 all the way down to number 1, we're ranking what each BTS member truly, genuinely, no filter looks for in a partner, and trust me, by the time we hit that top spot, you're gonna look at your bias completely differently. Let's get into it. Number 7. J-Hope, the man who needs someone to match his hidden darkness. You probably didn't expect him here, and honestly, that's exactly why he's the perfect one to start with. Young Hoseok, the guy the entire world knows as the son of BTS, the human vitamin, the member who literally named himself Hope, is also the one whose ideal type tells a story most fans never bother to read between the lines. See, here's what most people get wrong about HYBE. They hear him say in interviews that he wants someone bright, someone cheerful, someone who loves him a lot, and they think, okay, simple guy, simple taste. But if you've been paying attention, really paying attention, to the way this man has evolved from 2013 to now, you'd realize that his ideal partner isn't about finding another son. It's about finding someone who can sit with him in the dark. Let's rewind. Hoseok grew up in Gwangju, a city in the southwestern part of South Korea that carries deep historical weight. It was the site of the 1980 Gwangju Uprising, a democratic movement that shaped Korean identity. His family wasn't wealthy. His father worked hard, and his mother sacrificed a lot. In multiple interviews, HYBE has talked about how his bright personality wasn't entirely natural. It was partly a survival mechanism. He became the mood maker because someone had to be. In a 2018 Bangtan bomb, he once said something that hit hard without anyone really noticing. When I'm alone, I'm actually really quiet. That's not a throwaway line. That's a confession. The J-Hope you see on camera is a performance of joy, not because it's fake, but because he's chosen to carry that role so others don't have to feel uncomfortable. Now think about what that means for a relationship. This is a man who has spent over a decade being everyone else's emotional anchor. In every group dynamic analysis, HYBE is consistently identified as the member who regulates BTS's emotional temperature. When things get tense, he cracks a joke. When energy drops, he amps it up. He did it during their hardest years of being ignored, during their explosive rise when the pressure could have broken them, and during the military enlistment era when uncertainty loomed over everything. So when HYBE says he wants someone who takes care of him, he's not being cute. He's being dead serious. He wants someone who sees past the sunshine and says, "You don't have to perform for me." In a 2019 Weverse reply, a fan asked what kind of moment would make him fall in love, and his answer was unexpectedly specific. He said something along the lines of wanting someone who'd notice when he's tired before he even says it. That's not surface-level attraction. That's emotional intelligence. That's someone who reads the room, reads him, and doesn't need a manual to understand when the happy mask is getting heavy. And here's where it gets even more interesting. HYBE is the member who arguably has the strongest work ethic in BTS, and yes, that's saying something in a group where Yoongi exists. His dance practice hours are legendary. His solo album, Jack in the Box, wasn't a commercial play, it was a raw, almost aggressive artistic statement that surprised everyone because it was dark, gritty, and nothing like chicken noodle soup. He chose to release Arson and More as title tracks songs about burning out, about wanting more from life even when you've already achieved everything. A man who creates art like that isn't looking for someone who just giggles at his jokes. He needs a partner who understands ambition at a cellular level, someone who has their own fire, their own thing, their own grind. In multiple variety show appearances, he's mentioned being attracted to someone who's passionate about their own career. Not clingy, not dependent, but fiercely independent while still being emotionally available. And if you think that combination is easy to find, you haven't been looking hard enough. There's also the physical side, which HYBE has been surprisingly consistent about over the years. He's mentioned being drawn to someone who dresses well, not flashy, but intentional. He appreciates style, which makes sense for a man whose own fashion sense has evolved from streetwear to high-fashion collaborations with Louis Vuitton and Dior. He's talked about liking long hair, a good smile, and someone who's physically affectionate, holding hands, casual touches, the kind of warmth that doesn't need words. But even those physical preferences circle back to the same core theme. He wants someone who makes warmth feel safe, not performative. The real kicker? HYBE is the member who, during BTS's Chapter 2 discussions, got the most emotional about the idea of personal life versus professional life. When the group sat down for that now legendary Festa dinner in 2022, Hoseok was visibly processing the weight of what individual paths meant for all of them. A man who carries that much emotional responsibility for his group is going to need a partner who doesn't add weight, someone who lifts it. Not by being his therapist, but by being his peace. Quiet mornings, no cameras, no expectations, just existing together without anyone needing to be on. That's what J-Hope is really looking for. Not another spotlight. A safe room with the lights turned low. But if HYBE's looking for someone who sees past the performance, wait until you hear what the next member demands from love, because his standards aren't emotional, they're almost philosophical. Number 6. V. The old soul who's looking for a love that doesn't exist anymore. Kim Taehyung is not looking for a girlfriend. Let's just get that out of the way right now. He's looking for a feeling, a very specific, almost extinct feeling that belongs to a world most people his age have never even experienced. And that's exactly what makes his ideal type the most fascinating, the most layered, and, honestly, the most heartbreaking on this entire list. Because Taehyung isn't chasing modern love. He's chasing something vintage, something your grandparents had, something that smells like old books and sounds like a jazz record crackling at 2 a.m. in a dimly lit apartment. And the scary part? He knows it might not exist anymore, and he's still holding out for it. Let's start with where this man comes from, because you cannot understand Taehyung's heart without understanding Jeochang. Not Taegu Jeochang. Yes, he moved to Taegu later, but Taehyung spent his formative childhood years in Jeochang, a rural countryside area in South Gyeongsang province, surrounded by farmland, mountains, and a pace of life that makes city living feel like a fever dream. He was raised largely by his grandparents while his parents worked, and that experience didn't just shape his personality, it fundamentally wired the way he processes love. His grandmother was, by multiple accounts from Taehyung himself, one of the most important figures in his life. He's spoken about her warmth, her simplicity, the way love in that household wasn't expressed through grand gestures, but through quiet acts, a meal prepared just the way he liked it, a hand on his head when he was scared, presence without performance. When Taehyung says he wants someone with a good heart, he's not giving a pageant answer. He's describing his grandmother. He's describing a love language that doesn't need Wi-Fi. And this is where Taehyung diverges from literally every other member of BTS when it comes to what he wants in a partner. Most idols, when asked about ideal types, talk about appearance, personality traits, vibes. Taehyung talks about scenes. He describes cinematic moments. In one now legendary interview, he described his ideal date as walking through a neighborhood with someone in matching coats, stopping at a small shop, buying something warm to drink, and just talking. No club, no fancy restaurant, no Instagram-worthy backdrop. Just two people being completely ordinary together. That's not a date idea. That's a Nora Ephron screenplay. That's a Wong Kar-wai film without the heartbreak. And it tells you everything about what this man values. He doesn't want excitement from a partner. He wants texture. He wants the kind of love that feels lived in, like a favorite sweater you've worn so many times it's molded to your body. Now here's the fact that blew up across Korean fan communities and never got enough attention internationally, Taehyung once said, in a fan meeting interaction that was recorded and circulated heavily on Naver. That one of the most attractive things a person can do is spend money on their parents before spending it on themselves. Read that again. He didn't say, buy me gifts. He didn't say, look good. He said he wants someone whose instinct is to take care of their family first. That's not a preference. That's a value system. That's a man who grew up watching sacrifice as the primary language of love, and now he can't unsee it. He's filtering every potential partner through the lens of, would this person sit at my family's dinner table and feel like they belong? And if the answer is no, nothing else matters, not beauty, not status, not charm. There's also the artistic dimension, which with Taehyung is not a side note, it's the whole story. This is a man who visits art museums alone in every city BTS tours in. He's friends with contemporary artists. He photographs on film, not digital, film, because he likes the imperfection, the grain, the way film captures a moment with texture that digital smooths away. His solo album, Layover, wasn't a pop album. It was a mood, slow, jazzy, romantic in the most aching way possible. Tracks like Slow Dancing and Rainy Days aren't songs about falling in love. They're songs about wanting to freeze a moment of love before it disappears. A man who creates music like that isn't going to fall for someone who lives on the surface. He needs depth. He needs someone who can sit in a gallery for 2 hours without checking their phone. Someone who reads books not for productivity, but for the feeling of disappearing into another world. Someone who understands that beauty isn't always loud. In various Run BTS episodes and Bon Voyage seasons, you can see Taehyung's relationship patterns play out in real time. He's the member who wanders off alone, finds a random local, has a full conversation with a stranger, and comes back with a story that sounds made up but absolutely happened. He collects human moments. He's drawn to authenticity in a way that's almost allergic to pretense. If you try too hard around Taehyung, he'll feel it. If you perform a version of yourself that isn't real, he'll clock it instantly, not because he's judgmental, but because he grew up in a world where people didn't have the luxury of being fake. Jeon didn't have filters. You were who you were, and love was what it was. And let's talk about the physical side, because Taehyung has been both the most specific and the most contradictory member when it comes to this. Early in BTS's career, he mentioned liking someone with long legs, a nice smile, someone who looks good in both a dress and casual clothes. But as he's matured, those specifics have faded almost entirely. In more recent years, he's shifted to talking about aura, someone who has a warm presence, someone whose energy you feel before they even speak. He's mentioned being drawn to someone who laughs easily, not performatively, but genuinely, the kind of laugh that makes you want to say something funny again just to hear it one more time. That evolution from physical checklist to emotional resonance is one of the most telling character arcs of any BTS member, because it mirrors his own artistic evolution, from the flashy, eccentric 4D alien of early Bangtan to the contemplative, deeply grounded artist he's become. The Taehyung of 2015 wanted a pretty girl. The Taehyung of now wants a soul that matches his frequency. And here's the part that makes his spot on this list genuinely emotional. Taehyung is the member who has been the most openly romantic about the concept of forever. He's talked about wanting to get married, wanting kids, wanting a household filled with warmth. He's described wanting to be the kind of father who takes his children to the countryside, who teaches them to appreciate nature, who raises them the way he was raised, with love that doesn't need to announce itself. In a world where most men his age are terrified of commitment, Taehyung is actively dreaming about it. He's not looking for a fling or a headline. He's looking for a life partner. Someone who'll grow old with him, who'll sit on a porch somewhere decades from now and still find him interesting. Someone who makes the ordinary feel sacred. That's Kim Taehyung's ideal type. Not a fantasy. A home. But while Taehyung's searching for a love that transcends time, the next member on this list has a requirement so brutally honest, so unapologetically blunt, that it made even his own members go silent when he said it out loud. Number 5. Jungkook. The golden boy who's terrified of loving wrong. Here's something nobody talks about enough. Jungkook has never had a normal relationship timeline. Not one. While most guys his age were fumbling through awkward first dates in high school, figuring out how to text a crush without sounding desperate, learning the messy, beautiful basics of what it means to like someone and have them like you back. Jungkook was in a practice room in Seoul, 14 years old, sleeping in a dorm with 6 older guys, training to become one of the biggest pop stars on the planet. He left Busan, his hometown, his family, his friends, everything familiar at an age when most kids are still figuring out what subjects they like in school. And that single fact, that sacrifice made before he was even old enough to fully understand what he was giving up, has shaped every single thing Jungkook looks for in a partner. Because this isn't a man who's picky. This is a man who literally doesn't have a reference point for what normal love looks like, and he's been trying to build one from scratch using song lyrics, his Hyung's advice, and whatever fragments of real life he's managed to grab between world tours and album cycles. That's not romantic. That's devastating. And it makes his ideal type the most psychologically complex one we've covered so far. Let's start with the thing everyone already knows, IU. Jungkook's celebrity crush on Lee Ji-yoon has been documented since BTS's rookie days, and for years, fans treated it as this adorable little factoid, something to giggle about during fan meetings. But if you actually analyze why Jungkook was drawn to IU, the picture gets a lot more revealing. IU debuted young, just like him. She was underestimated, just like him. She faced public scrutiny at an age when she should have been protected from it, just like him. And despite all of that, she became one of the most respected, versatile, and emotionally intelligent artists in Korean entertainment history. Jungkook wasn't crushing on a pretty face, he was idolizing a survivor. Someone who took everything the industry threw at her and turned it into art without losing her softness. That's not a teenage crush. That's a blueprint. That's Jungkook unconsciously mapping out the kind of woman who could understand his world without being destroyed by it. Now fast forward to the years where Jungkook started being more honest, the V-Live era, the Weverse era, the late-night solo broadcasts where he'd sit with a drink and just talk. These unfiltered moments revealed something the polished interviews never could. Jungkook is deeply, almost painfully, aware of how abnormal his life is, and he's terrified that abnormality makes him unlovable in the ways that matter. In one late-night live that fans have dissected endlessly, he talked about wanting someone he could be completely comfortable with, and the way he said it carried weight, like comfort wasn't a preference, but a survival need. Think about his daily reality. Every face he sees either wants something from him or is performing for him. Fans scream his name. Industry people calculate his value. Even casual acquaintances probably can't fully separate Jungkook the person from Jungkook the global superstar. So when he says he wants comfort, he means he wants someone who can sit next to him on a couch, watch a movie, eat ramen, and treat him like he's just some guy, not the golden magne, not the idol with 50 million Instagram followers, not the face that launched 1,000 brand deals. Just Jungkook. Just the kid from Busan who likes banana milk and Overwatch and singing in the shower. That hunger for normalcy shows up in almost every detail of his stated preferences. He's mentioned wanting someone who cooks well, not because he's being traditionally patriarchal about it, but because a home-cooked meal represents something he almost never gets to experience. It's domesticity. It's routine. It's the opposite of living out of suitcases in 5-star hotels across 12 time zones. When Jungkook says he wants someone who cooks, what he's really saying is, I want a home. Not a house, not a penthouse in Hanam-dong, a home, with smells coming from the kitchen and someone calling his name not because they want a photo, but because dinner's ready. There's also the jealousy factor, which Jungkook has been surprisingly, almost disarmingly open about. In multiple interactions, fan signs, variety shows, group discussions, he's admitted to being possessive in relationships. Not in a toxic, controlling way, but in the way someone who's deeply insecure about abandonment might cling to certainty. Remember, this is someone who watched his trainee friends get cut one by one before debut, who experienced the brutal uncertainty of whether BTS would survive their early years, who had to process the group's hiatus announcement live on camera during Festa 2022. Loss, or the threat of it, is baked into Jungkook's emotional operating system. So when he says he wants someone who only looks at him, he's not being possessive in the way the internet might mock. He's asking for loyalty as proof of safety. He's saying, "I've had so many things taken away or threatened, please don't be one of them." His physical preferences have evolved in ways that mirror his own transformation, and this is something fans who've followed him from 2013 onward can track almost year by year. Early Jungkook, the shy, bunny-smiled teenager, talked about liking someone cute, someone smaller than him, someone with a bright personality. It was innocent and predictable for a 15-year-old. But as Jungkook grew into the tattooed, muscular, artistically confident man he is now, his preferences shifted towards something harder to define. He's talked about being attracted to confidence, not arrogance, but the quiet kind, the kind where someone walks into a room and doesn't need to announce themselves. He's mentioned liking someone who challenges him, who doesn't just agree with everything he says, who has opinions and isn't afraid to voice them. That's a massive shift from someone cute and small, and it tracks perfectly with his own growth from the magne who hid behind his hyungs to the solo artist who released Golden and Standing Next to You, an album and a track that screamed confidence, sensuality, and artistic maturity. The Jungkook who wants a challenging partner is the same Jungkook who challenged himself to go solo and proved he could carry a stadium alone. And then there's the detail that doesn't get discussed enough, Jungkook's relationship with his older brother, Junghyun. While BTS's members obviously shaped him enormously, Junghyun represents the one connection to Jungkook's pre-fame life that stayed constant. His brother has lived a normal life, normal job, normal relationships, normal trajectory. And Jungkook has watched that from the other side of the glass. There's something bittersweet about a man who has everything the world says should make him happy, watching his own brother experience the kind of ordinary love that he might never get to have without it being a headline. When Jungkook talks about wanting simplicity in a partner, he's not performing humility. He's mourning something he gave up before he knew its value. The woman who captures Jungkook's heart won't be the most beautiful, the most famous, or the most impressive person in the room. She'll be the one who makes him forget that he's Jungkook. The one who turns the volume of the entire world down to zero and makes him feel like that 14-year-old kid from Busan again, except this time, he's not alone, and he doesn't have to prove anything to anyone. But if Jungkook is searching for someone who silences the noise, the next member on this list needs something far more specific, something that cuts so deep into his identity that getting it wrong wouldn't just break his heart. It would break his entire sense of self. Number 4. Jimin, the man hiding the deepest heart behind the loudest laugh. Nobody in the history of K-pop has been more aggressively misread than Seokjin. And that's not an exaggeration. That's a provable, documented, decade-long pattern of the entire world looking at this man and seeing exactly what he wants them to see instead of what's actually there. The broad shoulders, the worldwide handsome catchphrase, the relentless dad jokes, the windshield wiper laugh that could fill an arena without a microphone, Jimin has constructed the most effective emotional armor in the entirety of BTS. And he's done it so well that most people don't even realize it's armor. They think that's just who he is. The funny one. The pretty one. The one who doesn't take things too seriously. But crack that shell open, and what you find underneath is a man whose ideal type reveals more about loneliness, sacrifice, and the cost of being the eldest than any interview answer could ever capture. Start here, because this is the foundation everything else sits on. Seokjin was never supposed to be an idol. He was a film studies student at Konkuk University, one of Seoul's prestigious private institutions, studying to become an actor. He had a plan. He had a trajectory. Then a big hit entertainment casting director spotted him stepping off a bus near campus, and the entire course of his life pivoted on a stranger's snap judgment about his face. Jeon didn't audition because he dreamed of being in a boy band since childhood. He didn't grow up training in dance academies or vocal studios like some of his members did. He walked into Big Hit with virtually zero performance experience and was placed into a trainee system alongside guys who'd been preparing for this moment for years. Imagine that for a second. Imagine being surrounded by people who are objectively better than you at the thing you're all supposed to do together, knowing that you're there primarily because of how you look, and having to close that gap while the clock ticks toward a debut date that doesn't care about your learning curve. That experience, that foundational insecurity wrapped in a face the world calls beautiful, is the key that unlocks everything about what Jeon wants in a partner. Because a man who has spent his entire career being valued first for his appearance is, paradoxically, the member least interested in appearance when it comes to love. Jin's stated preferences over the years have been almost stubbornly anti-superficial. He's consistently talked about wanting someone with a kind personality, someone who's genuine, someone who's warm. In early fan meetings, he used to say he likes someone who looks like a puppy, soft features, approachable, the kind of face that makes you feel safe rather than intimidated. But as the years have gone on, even that mild physical descriptor has faded into something more abstract. What's replaced it is a fixation on emotional quality that borders on philosophical. He wants someone who laughs. Not politely, not on cue, genuinely laughs, the kind of laughter that bends you in half and makes your stomach hurt. He said this in so many different ways across so many different platforms that it's clearly not a casual preference. It's a need. And when you understand why, it hits differently. Jeon is the member who has released some of BTS's most emotionally devastating solo work while simultaneously being perceived as the group's comedian. Epiphany wasn't a pop song, it was a man learning to love himself after years of feeling like the weakest link in the most powerful group on earth. Abyss, released quietly on SoundCloud in 2020, was even more raw. Jeon openly talked about the depression and self-doubt that accompanied its creation, comparing himself to the other members and feeling like he constantly fell short. The man who makes everyone laugh spent years privately convinced he wasn't good enough. So when Jeon says he wants someone who genuinely laughs with him, he's not looking for an audience. He's looking for validation that the real him, not the idol, not the visual, not the variety show character, is someone worth being around. He's asking, if I stop performing, if I drop every joke and every persona, will you still want to sit across from me at a dinner table? That dinner table, by the way, is not a metaphor. Jin's love language might literally be food. This is a man who has built an entire personal brand around cooking, eating, and feeding others. His Eat Jeon series, mukbang-style broadcasts where he eats meals on camera, became a cultural phenomenon not because the food was extraordinary, but because watching Jeon eat felt like sitting with a friend. He savors things. He describes flavors with genuine enthusiasm. He cooks for the members constantly, and in behind-the-scenes footage, you can see something shift in his entire demeanor when he's in a kitchen. The performance drops, the jokes become less frequent, and what's left is a man who is genuinely, quietly happy doing something that has nothing to do with fame. So when Jeon has mentioned in interviews wanting a partner who appreciates food, who can cook together with him, who enjoys the ritual of a shared meal, he's describing the space where he feels most authentically himself. The kitchen isn't just a room for Jeon. It's the one place where Seokjin the person fully overtakes Jeon the idol. A partner who meets him there, who ties on an apron and argues about seasoning and steals bites before the dish is done, that's not a girlfriend to him. That's a soulmate. There's also a dimension to Jin's ideal type that comes specifically from being the eldest in BTS, and this one doesn't get discussed nearly enough. For over a decade, Jeon has been the hyung, the one who absorbs stress so the younger members don't have to, the one who diffuses tension with humor when arguments get heated in the studio, the one who volunteered to enlist in the military first so the others could have more time. During that military enlistment announcement, Jeon held it together publicly while the weight of being the first to go, the first to step away from the thing that defined all 7 of them, sat invisibly on his shoulders. A man who carries that specific burden, the burden of perpetual selflessness dressed up as duty, is starving for one thing in a relationship, to be taken care of. Not financially, not logistically, emotionally. Jeon wants someone who notices when he's carrying too much and takes something off the pile without being asked. He's described wanting a partner who's like a best friend, someone he can be completely childish with, someone who tolerates his terrible puns, someone who sees the silliness not as a deflection mechanism, but as his love language. Because here's the truth about Jin's humor that most people miss. The dad jokes aren't a wall. They're an invitation. Every terrible pun, every exaggerated reaction, every moment where he makes himself the butt of the joke is Jeon saying, "I trust you enough to look stupid in front of you." And the person who gets that, who laughs not at the joke but at the joy of him telling it, who fires back with an equally terrible pun and watches his face light up, that person has already passed every test Jeon will ever set. He doesn't need perfection. He doesn't need beauty. He doesn't need someone who's impressed by his fame or his face or his net worth. He needs someone who makes the smallest, most ordinary moments feel like they matter. Someone who turns grocery shopping into an adventure. Someone who falls asleep on his shoulder during a movie and doesn't apologize for it. Someone who treats love not as a grand performance, but as a long, comfortable, slightly ridiculous conversation that never has to end. That's Kim Seokjin's ideal type. Not a love story. A buddy comedy that accidentally becomes the greatest romance ever told. But while Jeon searches for someone who makes the ordinary extraordinary, the next member has a requirement so razor-sharp, so non-negotiable, that it's eliminated almost every potential partner before they even get close. And when you hear what it is, you'll understand why he's been alone by choice, not by accident. Number 3. Suga. The genius who warned you he'd choose music over you. Min Yoongi told you exactly who he was from the very beginning. No sugarcoating, no diplomatic idle answer, no carefully worded PR response designed to keep every fan's fantasy intact. He looked directly into a camera and said, with the kind of calm that only comes from absolute certainty, that any woman who wanted to be with him would need to accept one non-negotiable truth. She would always come second to his music. Always. Not sometimes, not during comeback season, not when deadlines get tight always. And the wildest part? He wasn't being dramatic. He wasn't trying to sound cool or mysterious or tortured artist chic. He was issuing a warning, the same way you'd warn someone about a steep cliff before they start hiking. That's Min Yoongi's version of honesty. Most people flinch from it. The right partner? She'd hear that and stay anyway, not because she's settling, but because she understands that a man who's that honest about his priorities will be exactly that honest about his love. And in a world full of men who promise you the moon and deliver nothing, Yoongi's bluntness isn't a red flag. It might be the greenest flag on this entire list. To understand why music sits on the throne of Yoongi's heart above everything else, you have to go back to Taehyung in the early 2000s, to a version of Min Yoongi that the polished, Grammy-nominated, critically acclaimed producer of today would barely recognize. His family was not well off. That's the polite way Korean media phrases it. The raw version is that Yoongi grew up in circumstances where financial anxiety was a daily background hum, the kind that seeps into a child's nervous system and never fully leaves, no matter how many zeros end up in their bank account later. His parents worked service jobs. The apartment was small. Opportunities were scarce. And somewhere in that scarcity, a teenage boy discovered hip-hop, not the glossy, mainstream kind, but underground Korean rap, the raw, unpolished, politically charged scene that existed in Taehyung's music circles during the mid-2000s. For Yoongi, hip-hop wasn't entertainment. It was oxygen. It was the first thing in his life that made the world make sense. He started producing beats on cheap equipment, writing lyrics in notebooks during class, performing at underground venues where the audience was sometimes smaller than the number of people on stage. His parents didn't support it. That detail gets glossed over in most BTS retrospectives, but it deserves to sit in your chest for a moment. The thing that saved Min Yoongi's life was the thing his own family told him to stop doing. They wanted him to get a real job, a stable job, the kind of job that doesn't make your mother stay up at night wondering if her son is going to end up broke and broken. And Yoongi understood their fear. He's said in multiple interviews that he never resented his parents for it because he knew it came from love, from their own experience of what happens when dreams don't work out. But he couldn't stop. The music wouldn't let him. So he made a choice that most people never have the courage to make. He chose the uncertain, terrifying, probably going to fail path because the alternative was a life that felt like slow suffocation. A man who made that choice at 17 is not going to abandon that altar for anyone. Not for a pretty face, not for a warm body, not for the kind of love that asks him to be smaller than he is. And that's what Yoongi's ideal type really comes down to. He needs someone who doesn't ask him to shrink. Before he became Suga, before August D became one of the most respected solo projects in Korean music history, Yoongi worked part-time jobs to survive trainee life. One of those jobs was delivering food on a motorcycle, and during one delivery, he got into an accident that injured his shoulder badly enough to require surgery years later. He didn't tell Big Hit about the injury for a long time because he was afraid they'd cut him from the debut lineup. Let that sink in. A young man in physical pain kept his mouth shut and kept dancing and performing because the alternative, losing his shot at music, was more painful than any torn ligament. That level of dedication, that willingness to sacrifice his own body for his craft, isn't just work ethic. It's identity. Yoongi doesn't do music. Yoongi is music. Strip everything else away, the fame, the money, the sold-out stadiums, and what's left is a man sitting alone in a dark studio at 3 a.m., tweaking a hi-hat pattern until it sounds exactly right. His studio, by the way, is named Genius Lab, and it's not just a workspace. It's a sanctuary. Members have described going to find Yoongi and discovering him still in the studio, having worked through the night, sometimes through the entire next day, lost in the process of creation. A potential partner doesn't just need to accept that Yoongi disappears into that room for extended periods. She needs to understand that when he emerges, he's not coming back to her from a job, he's coming back from the most intimate relationship he has with himself. If she can hold that truth without jealousy, without resentment, without the slow poison of feeling like she's competing with something she can never beat, then she's already closer to Yoongi's heart than 99% of people will ever get. His stated preferences on the surface seem simple enough to be almost dismissive. He said he wants someone who's into hip-hop, someone who's calm, someone who's quiet, someone who doesn't need constant attention. But pull each of those threads and the tapestry that emerges is far more specific than it appears. Into hip-hop doesn't mean she needs to be a rapper or even a musician. It means she needs to understand the culture. Hip-hop, for Yoongi, isn't a genre. It's a worldview. It's storytelling as survival. It's turning pain into something beautiful without apologizing for the pain. A woman who gets that, who listens to a track and hears the story behind the beat, who understands why Yoongi pours his depression, his anger, his fear, and his defiance into songs like The Last and Amygdala. That woman speaks his language. And for a man as guarded as Min Yoongi, shared language isn't a bonus. It's the entry requirement. The calm and quiet aspect deserves unpacking too, because it's not about personality type in the bubbly versus reserved sense. Yoongi's life is chaos. His professional existence is schedules, cameras, screaming crowds, constant movement. The man literally described his ideal day off as sleeping, not traveling, not partying, not socializing. Sleeping. His nervous system craves stillness. So when he says he wants someone quiet, he's describing the emotional texture of the relationship itself. Not boring, quiet. The difference is crucial. Boring is stagnant. Quiet is peaceful. It's two people reading in the same room without needing to fill the silence. It's a car ride where the conversation pauses and neither person feels compelled to restart it. It's the kind of comfort that most couples take years to build, but Yoongi needs it from the start because he doesn't have the bandwidth to perform intimacy. What you see is what you get. If he loves you, you'll know not from grand gestures or poetic declarations, but from the fact that he let you into the Genius Lab. He let you sit on that couch while he works. He made you a cup of coffee without asking if you wanted one. Yoongi's love language is acts of service delivered so quietly you might miss them if you're not paying attention. And the woman who catches them, who notices the small things and understands that, coming from him, they're enormous. She's the one. Min Holly, his beloved brown toy poodle, actually tells you everything you need to know about how Yoongi loves. He doesn't post about Holly for clout. He doesn't perform pet dad content for cameras. He just genuinely, softly, almost shyly adores this dog, and when he talks about Holly, the entire Yoongi persona, the savage rapper, the blunt critic, the stone-faced genius, dissolves into something unbearably tender. The woman Yoongi falls for will see that version of him. Not the Augusty who sets stages on fire. The man who baby talks his dog when he thinks no one's watching. That's the real Min Yoongi. And he's not looking for someone who can handle his intensity. He's looking for someone who makes the intensity unnecessary. But while Yoongi demands a partner who can love him without competing with his art, the next member on this list carries a contradiction so deep, so silently painful, that his ideal type isn't a preference at all. It's a mirror of the one thing he's never been able to give himself. Number 2, Jimin, the perfectionist who can't accept the love he desperately gives. What do you do with a man who pours love into everyone around him like it's infinite, like his chest is an ocean with no floor, like there's no limit to how much warmth he can offer the world, but the second that same love is pointed back at him, he flinches? What do you do with someone who has spent his entire adult life perfecting every move, every note, every angle of his body, every expression on his face, also the world will find him worthy, and still goes to bed at night genuinely uncertain that he is? That's Park Jimin. That's the contradiction that lives at the center of the most emotionally generous member of BTS. And his ideal type isn't a list of traits or preferences or physical descriptions. His ideal type is, at its core, the answer to a question he's been asking himself since he was 16 years old. Am I enough exactly as I am? Before we unpack what Jimin looks for in a partner, we need to sit with a moment that changed the trajectory of his entire self-image, and it happened before BTS ever performed on a single stage. Park Jimin was a contemporary dance prodigy at Busan High School of Arts. Not a hobbyist, not a casual student, a top-ranked performer who was so gifted that his teachers recommended him for the big hit audition. He moved to Seoul and entered the trainee system, and here's the detail that most people don't sit with long enough. Jimin was the last member confirmed for BTS's debut lineup. The very last. While other members had months or even years of certainty about their place in the group, Jimin lived in a state of perpetual almost confirmed, almost cut, almost good enough, but never quite secure. That experience didn't just affect his confidence. It programmed his entire emotional architecture. From that moment forward, Park Jimin operated under a silent, relentless belief that his spot was borrowed, that he had to earn his place every single day, that the moment he stopped being extraordinary was the moment someone would tap him on the shoulder and say it was over. You can see this programming play out across BTS's entire career in ways that are both awe-inspiring and heartbreaking. Jimin is the member who practices the longest. Not because he's the least talented, he's arguably the most naturally gifted dancer in the group, but because good was never good enough for someone whose foundational experience taught him that being good still almost got him eliminated. His vocal performances push his body to the edge. His high notes aren't effortless. They're acts of war against a voice that doesn't naturally sit in that register, forced upward by sheer willpower because Jimin decided that if he was going to be here, he was going to be undeniable. And the physical toll? During BTS's early years, Jimin's extreme dieting became a matter of public concern. He's admitted to eating one meal a day, sometimes less during comeback periods, driven by a belief that his body wasn't slim enough, his jawline wasn't sharp enough, his silhouette on stage wasn't sculpted enough. A man who starves himself in pursuit of an ever-receding standard of perfection is not going to describe his ideal girlfriend in simple terms. His ideal type is tangled in every insecurity he's ever had, and untangling it reveals something profoundly moving. Jimin has said, across multiple interviews and fan interactions, that he wants someone kind. That word, kind, sounds generic coming from anyone else. Coming from Jimin, it's loaded with history. Kindness, for him, isn't about being nice or polite or pleasant. It's about gentleness with imperfection. It's about someone who sees him on a bad day, a day where the choreography felt sloppy, where his voice cracked during rehearsal, where he looked in the mirror and didn't like what stared back, and doesn't try to fix him or motivate him or give him a pep talk. Just sits with him. Just lets the bad day be a bad day without it becoming evidence that he's failing. That kind of kindness, the kind that doesn't demand recovery on a timeline, is what Jimin has been starving for even more than food. His love language is the most well-documented in BTS, and it tells you everything about both what he gives and what he needs. Jimin is the most physically affectionate member of the group by a wide margin. He hugs the members constantly. He holds their hands. He drapes himself over their shoulders. He cups their faces. He writes them long, emotional letters on every anniversary. During concerts, he's the one who cries first, who looks into the crowd with eyes that are so full of gratitude it's almost painful to witness. Jimin doesn't just express love, he broadcasts it, amplifies it, turns it into something visible and tangible because in his mind, love that isn't demonstrated might not be believed. And here's the devastating flip side. A man who shows love that loudly is usually someone who's terrified that quiet love won't be noticed. Jimin performs affection because somewhere deep in his wiring, he's not fully convinced that he's lovable without the performance. So his ideal partner needs to be someone who matches his emotional intensity, not necessarily in the same way, but with the same depth. He's described wanting someone who's expressive, someone who tells him directly that they care about him, someone who doesn't assume he knows. Because Jimin doesn't assume. He questions. Constantly. Every reassurance he receives gets filtered through a machine of self-doubt that distorts it, weakens it, makes it feel temporary. The woman who breaks through that filter won't do it with a single grand gesture. She'll do it through relentless, patient, daily repetition. I love you, I'm not going anywhere, you're enough, said so many times that even Jimin's doubt runs out of counterarguments. The duality factor is something his fans talk about endlessly, and it's genuinely relevant to his ideal type in ways most analyses miss. On stage, Jimin is fire, sensual, commanding, dangerous. His performances in songs like Filter and Set Me Free PT2 showcase a version of him that oozes confidence, that dares you to look away. Off stage, he's soft, giggly, shy, the kind of person who covers his mouth when he laughs and gets flustered by compliments. Most fans frame this as cute duality, but it's deeper than that. It's a man who has genuinely fractured himself into two identities because the real Park Jimin, the soft one, the uncertain one, the one who calls his mom in Busan when things get hard, never felt powerful enough to survive this industry on his own. He built stage Jimin as a shield. And the right partner needs to love both versions without preference. If she only loves the confident performer, she'll make the real Jimin feel invisible. If she only loves the soft, gentle version, she'll make him feel like his ambition and fire are too much. The balance is everything, and it's impossibly rare to find someone who can hold both without flinching. His solo album, Face, cracked this entire narrative wide open in a way that stunned even longtime fans. The album wasn't about love or heartbreak in the traditional sense. It was about Jimin confronting his own face, literally and metaphorically, and asking who's actually there when the makeup comes off, when the stage lights die, when the screaming stops. Like Crazy described a numbing loneliness masked by partying and distraction. Alone was exactly what the title promised. These aren't the songs of a man who has his emotional life figured out. These are the songs of someone who has given so much of himself to the world that he's not entirely sure what's left for a partner to love. And that might be the most important thing about Jimin's ideal type. She doesn't need to love what's left. She needs to help him see that nothing was ever missing in the first place. The woman Park Jimin falls for won't be the most beautiful or the most accomplished or the most exciting person he's ever met. She'll be the one who looks at him, not Jimin the idol, not Jimin the dancer, not Jimin the brand, and says, with total conviction, the version of you that you think isn't enough? That's my favorite one. And the day he believes her is the day Park Jimin finally stops performing love and starts living it. But while Jimin searches for someone who silences his inner critic, the member sitting at number 1 has been quietly constructing the most complex, intellectually demanding, almost impossible blueprint for love that any idol has ever articulated. And when you hear it, you won't just understand his heart. You'll question everything you thought you knew about what it means to truly be seen by another person. Number 1 RM. The leader who built a cathedral of standards nobody can enter. Every other member on this list wants something from love, comfort, warmth, acceptance, peace, loyalty. Namjoon wants all of that, and then he wants something else entirely, something most people can't even articulate, let alone offer. He wants to be intellectually matched so precisely that the relationship itself becomes a form of philosophy. Not romance. Not companionship. Philosophy. The ongoing, never-ending, sometimes agonizing process of two minds examining life together and finding that the examination itself is the love. That's why he sits at number 1. Not because his standards are higher than the other members, because his standards exist in a dimension most people don't even know is there. Every BTS member has talked about wanting connection. Namjoon has talked about wanting understanding. And the distance between those two words is the distance between a good relationship and the kind of once-in-a-lifetime bond that Namjoon has quietly, obsessively, almost painfully been searching for since he was old enough to realize that being the smartest person in the room is one of the loneliest things a human being can experience. Start with the number that everyone knows but nobody fully processes, 148. That's Namjoon's tested IQ. For context, that places him in the top 0.1% of cognitive ability globally. He scored in the top 1.3% on South Korea's university entrance exam. He taught himself English, not conversational English, not tourist phrase English, fluent, nuanced, culturally literate English, by watching the American sitcom Friends with subtitles as a teenager in Ilsan. A kid in a middle-class Gyeonggi province suburb, with no English tutor, no immersion program, no study abroad experience, absorbed a second language through sheer intellectual hunger and the stubborn refusal to not understand something. That anecdote alone tells you more about what Namjoon needs in a partner than any interview answer ever could. This is a man whose brain doesn't rest. It doesn't idle. It doesn't do small talk. Every experience Namjoon has gets processed through layers of analysis, reflection, contextualization, and meaning-making that most people reserve for their most significant life events. He does it with everything: a walk through a forest, a painting in a gallery, a line in a book, a stranger's expression on the subway. His mind is a cathedral, vast and echoing and beautiful, but cathedrals are cold when you're alone in them. And Namjoon has been alone in his for a very long time. His reading habits aren't a personality quirk, they're a window into the kind of partner he's searching for. Namjoon reads Haruki Murakami, Hermann Hesse, Ursula K. Le Guin, and Korean literary fiction with the same voraciousness that most men his age consume social media content. His recommended reading lists have literally caused books to sell out across South Korea. The Namjoon effect on publishing is a documented economic phenomenon. He visits art museums in every city he travels to, not as a photo opportunity, but as a genuine pilgrimage. His Instagram, before and after the group's various social media shifts, has been a curated gallery of nature photography, art installations, philosophical quotes, and reflections on existence that read more like a graduate student's journal than a pop star's feed. When Namjoon says he wants someone intelligent, he's not talking about academic credentials or book knowledge or the ability to win a debate. He's talking about someone whose mind is alive, someone who notices things, who asks questions that don't have easy answers, who can sit in front of a piece of art and feel something they can't immediately name and be comfortable with that unnamed feeling. He wants a partner who reads not because it's trendy, but because the alternative, going through life without examining it, feels unbearable. He wants someone who hears a song and wonders why it made them sad. Someone who watches rain and thinks about impermanence. Someone whose inner world is rich enough to be a country Namjoon could explore for decades without running out of new territory. That's not a preference. That's a civilization-level requirement. And it's exactly why Namjoon's love life, or the apparent absence of one, makes so much sense. His solo work has been screaming this truth for years, but right place, wrong person took the subtext and carved it into stone. The album title alone is a thesis statement on Namjoon's entire romantic history. Not wrong place, wrong time, the cliché people use to explain failed connections. Wrong person. The place was right. The timing was right. But the person couldn't meet him where he lives, couldn't reach the altitude where his mind operates, couldn't navigate the labyrinth of his inner world without getting lost or, worse, getting bored. Every track on that album drips with the specific loneliness of a man who has tried, genuinely, earnestly tried, to connect with people and found that the connection kept shorting out at the same point, the point where surface conversation ends and real depth begins. Namjoon doesn't want to talk about what you did today. He wants to talk about why you did it. He doesn't want to know your favorite movie. He wants to know what it taught you about yourself. He doesn't want to hear that you love him. He wants to understand what your definition of love even is, whether you've interrogated it, whether you've sat with it long enough to know if it's truly yours or just something you inherited from a culture that sells romance like a product. That level of relentless existential inquiry is magnificent on an album. In a relationship, it's terrifying. And Namjoon knows it. He's the member who has been the most searingly honest about the possibility that he might be too much for a conventional relationship. So here's what just happened, and I need you to take a step back and actually process it before you scroll away. We just went through 7 men, and not a single one of them said they want a supermodel. Not one said they need someone famous. Nobody demanded wealth, status, clout, or a certain follower count. In a world that's absolutely obsessed with surface-level attraction, with swiping right based on a 2-second photograph, with reducing human beings to highlight reels and aesthetic feeds, these 7 guys, who could literally date anyone on the planet, described something radically different. J-Hope wants someone who sees past his sunshine and holds him in the dark. Taehyung wants a love so old-fashioned it feels like a memory from a life he hasn't lived yet. Jungkook wants someone who makes him forget he's the most famous 20-something on earth. Jeon wants a best friend who turns Tuesday night dinner into the most important event of the week. Suga wants a partner who respects his art enough to never compete with it. Jimin wants someone who loves the version of him he's convinced isn't good enough. And Namjoon wants a mind that matches his own so precisely it feels like finding the other half of a thought he's been carrying alone for decades. 7 completely different blueprints, and yet every single one circles back to the same invisible center: authenticity. Not beauty. Not perfection. Not some fantasy ideal pulled from a drama script. Real, messy, imperfect, hard-won authenticity. The kind that can't be faked because these men, who have spent their entire adult lives surrounded by performance, have developed the most finely tuned radar for fakeness on the planet. They've seen every version of I love you that comes with an agenda attached. They've experienced affection that evaporates the moment the cameras turn off. They've been objectified, idolized, reduced to fantasies, and projected onto by millions of people who love the idea of them without knowing the reality. So when they describe their ideal type, they're not listing features on a dating app. They're describing safety. They're describing the one person in 7 billion who could sit with them in a room with no cameras, no audience, no expectations, and make that room feel like the only place in the world worth being. That's the real story here. Not what BTS wants in a girlfriend. What BTS needs in order to feel human again. And the beautiful, heartbreaking truth at the center of all of it? The person each of them is looking for probably isn't someone extraordinary. She's probably someone ordinary who possesses the one quality that no amount of fame or money can buy, the ability to make an extraordinary person feel like it's okay to be ordinary too. And that right there is what separates love from everything else pretending to be it. That wraps up our deep dive. 7 members. 7 hearts. 7 completely different maps to the same destination. Thanks for staying until the very end. Not everyone makes it this far, and the fact that you did says something about what you value too. Until next time.